Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our fourth and final segment. We're going to talk about three different pieces, so I'm going to kick us off right away. Meredith Monk is the first artist that we're going to talk about, and her collaboration with Ping Chong, which manifested in, well, actually, it was their final collaboration together. They had worked on a number of pieces, but it was called The Games. Is a fragmented, abstracted narrative that's set in a sort of a post-nuclear situation, sort of like Dr. Strangelove, if you are familiar with the Kubrick film. As we've seen in the samplings from the Next Wave Festival, lots of abstract or fragmented or non-linear narratives that have been of interest to these artists. So the subtitle of the work is actually Remembrances of Things Present, which I think is often lost when it's not presented as a part of the program, but really, I think strongly leads to that post-nuclear feel. So Monk has actually reworked this idea to apply to a new release of her older works that are in a sort of fragmented time capsule fashion. And she's a really riveting artist to discuss. So it was also difficult to maybe discuss her work in particular because my favorite Philip Glass piece, and this is now the third time that he's made an appearance at the Next Wave Festival, Einstein on the Beach, is performed during this year as well. So big year for BAM in particular. So there's on BAM's archival site not an extensive amount of video of this performance, but Meredith Monk, and she often performs in her own works because she herself is a vocalist, has performed this or fragments of The Games in other concert settings. So we're going to listen to The Memory Game and her performing it in Paris. So let me go ahead and pull up our first listening example.
I forget. Ich vergesse, ich vergesse. Ich vergesse mein, vergesse. Ich vergesse mein, vergesse.
So really sharing a lot of characteristics that we, in terms of musical qualities that we heard in Philip Glass's work, slowly evolving musical structures, harmonies, largely built on ostinatos, repeating musical figures. So this was presented with 16 performers that, did different things from choreographed movement to theater to singing to varying degrees. And the video's a little washed out, but I'm fairly sure Meredith Monk was the performer in red. And speaking of her, it's really great to have an opportunity to listen to her in interview. So that's going to be our next listening example. Let me go ahead and pull it up.
I'm Meredith Monk. I'm a composer and performer and interdisciplinary artist. We're in the studio part of my loft, and this is where I do all my work. I also sleep here, and a lot of pieces have been created here. I've been here since 1972, and in those days this neighborhood was about 5 artists, a mafia restaurant, a coffee shop, and some spice factories, and now it's Tribeca, which is one of the chicer parts of New York. I probably wanted to be an artist since the time I was a child. Music was just a very natural part of my life. I felt that I was going to be a singer, and I think that when I was about 14, somehow I intuited that my temperament was much more to make something, to create something. This is the ersatz archival part, and I say ersatz because it's a bit of a mess, but it's videos and sound tapes that I have. There's some more in my office, and then there's some more in the Library of Performing Arts. The first real breakthrough piece for me was in 1966, and it was 16mm earrings, which was the first piece that I really did a whole vocal score for, the first piece that I used film in. Very visually oriented, like I was really thinking of the whole space as a kind of canvas. And also around that time I had the revelation about my voice as an instrument and not using text. A revelation that the voice itself could be the instrument, that I could pull my range, high and low, as far as I could, that it had the capacity to, in a sense, manifest movement, like the way the hand moves, or it could jump, it could spin, it could fall, that within it were characters or personae, different ages, landscapes, and particularly at the beginning, different ways of using sound. And also I felt that the human voice is the first instrument, and that it's a direct connection to the deepest level of energies and feelings for which we don't have words. So I felt this very strong power of the voice to be a universal kind of instrument. I just knew that I was onto something that had truth. There was just no question about it, and I felt that I was meant to do this. But I would go someplace in the Midwest of the United States, and some guy would be going, when we were rehearsing, is that singing or is that crowing? So I don't know if everybody got it. Quarry, I would call Quarry a meditation on war and fascism. I think that I was very inspired by my first trip to Europe in the early 70s, and I was very struck by the fact that men of a certain generation didn't seem to be around. So I asked, why is that? And they said, the world wars. And then I just started thinking about the 2 world wars, and I started thinking about occupation, and what would that be like? And then coming from an Eastern European Jewish background, which I do, I would contemplate, well, what would it be like to be taken away no matter how well I could sing? Or, I would just be a number. And so it's been a lifelong study. I feel like I'm still studying it because it's very, very relevant to what's going on now, particularly, these cycles of where does that come from, this fascist impulse? Why does that come up at certain times? I needed to find my way of doing it. How do you do a poetic documentary, really? So it was a wonderful project. And right now we're working on bringing it back. When material comes up, I just don't make any kind of judgment about it at first. I just let it come up. So it would be like if I were making a soup, I would just have the vegetables. And the vegetables are the vegetables, like the carrots, the celery is the celery. And then little by little, I start boiling them. And then the process starts refining. And then at a certain point, it's time to put it into a form and boil it down to its essence. And then I just have to keep following it and see what it needs. It's like I think of every piece I make as a world. And as an artist, I have to first listen for that world. I have to figure out what are the principles of that world and what that world needs. And even eliminate things that I think are so great because that it just doesn't work into the principles of that world. These days, I feel that there are two possibilities for artists right now to respond to our world. And one is a direct response and doing directly political art. Equally powerful is the group of artists that are thinking, we actually really have to figure out what an alternative reality would be and offer an antidote and really go back to the more timeless concerns of existence on Earth. My whole belief all these years, I've devoted my life to art, for 52 years, and I've always believed in the healing power of art. I think that art can melt walls, not build walls, melt them.
Again, really gifted creator, and that's mostly what I like to call her, is a creative voice. So really glad that this clip includes a number of excerpts of her previous performances to give you an idea of her inclinations. So we have two more artists that I want to cover. One is Robert Wilson, and he's next with his production of Golden Windows. And then lastly, we'll talk about John Cage and Merce Cunningham in a collaborative work with dance and music. Let me go ahead and pull up my lecture notes. So in the following year, in 1985, Robert Wilson creates Golden Windows, and it's a collaborative theatrical and musical work that really relies on some film elements as well, that had multiple composers that contributed to the overall sound and sonic environment. He's known for some collaborative efforts with other composers. Civil War was a 9-hour collaboration with Philip Glass that he did previous to this, which got better reviews than Golden Windows. But in any case, Robert Wilson, an important voice in the avant-garde theatrical scene. So let me go ahead and pull up our next listening example.
When you experience Bob's work, it's like you're going to a whole new galaxy. It's always unexpected, but has this unique vision that is something that becomes recognizably Robert Wilson, but even then, always new.
There is nobody who works like Bob Wilson. Bob Wilson is, first of all, he does not interpret a text. His actors are moving in slow motion, in very automatized, machine-like, robot-like actions. And his use of time, with his slowing down everything, allows the spectator to meditate on other things than those would happen on stage. And he wants the spectator to really free themselves from their background and their preconception. And once they have done this and they are able to enter the Wilsonian world, they can read a text differently without the interpretive baggage, and this is different for every single viewer. And that's very unique.
I know a Robert Wilson show as soon as I see the lighting design, as soon as I see his use of color in lights and of movement. Definitely his signature of slow motion in live performance is something that brings an oddly filmic quality to all of his productions.
After Bertolt Brecht, I think Bob Wilson revolutionized theater in the 20th century. And he changed completely the way how we are seeing theater and tried to establish a different communication between the spectator and the stage. And this is absolutely stunning.
So interestingly enough, he has obviously done theatrical direction and other works that are not of his own making. That's not, I mean, the Golden Windows text, I believe, is an adaptation of his, but a heavy adaptation. And just to kind of drive some of the points home, and I like that this showed some of the stills from his productions, heavy silhouetting and bold color palettes. So we're dealing with minimalist set design and really therefore focusing on our actors. And hopefully when these two women were talking about the qualities of his theatrical productions, the idea of things in slow motion might draw attention to and make a good connecting tissue to the fact that, like, he's going to work a lot with Philip Glass. He's going to be an important collaborator with musical forms that also share that same kind of aesthetic concern. So a couple more clips on Robert Wilson before we leave his work to talk about John Cage and Merce Cunningham.
When she asked me to design her funeral, I said, okay, I will design your funeral if we can start with that, and I'd like to put it in proscenium theaters. Marina's a performance artist, and I started out there in the 60s and sort of went in a different direction. Marina is coming from a world where everything is real and natural, and I'm coming from a theatrical world where things are not. I'm interested in the artificiality of the stage. To me, to be on stage it's not the same way you walk down the street. And she had no idea about how to project a voice and how to speak on stage. And she sat for months in the museum, and she's very powerful sitting in the museum, but to me, to sit on stage is something different.
Violent fights between mother and father. 57 dreams of jumping out window.
Willem helps us to get through the piece. He's like a narrator. He can be in the situation at sometimes, and sometimes he's out. So sometimes he's like the audience, like a spectator. All of my work is an opera in a sense. If we go back to the Latin sense of the word, opera means opus, means work. In opera, all of the arts are there: architecture, painting, poetry. They're all a part of what we call a theater. And in that sense, it's an opera in the classical, traditional sense. In my work, the whole stage is something like a mask. I work on the visual book first. I direct the work silently, so what I'm seeing is one thing. And then I work on the audio book after that, and I work on that separate. It's not something that you necessarily rationally can put together. It's something you experience, and to experience something is a way of thinking. If you see a sunset, it doesn't necessarily have to have meaning. It's something you experience. If you hear the birds chattering, they don't have to make a certain sense. It's something I listen to.
Marina Abramovich, if you don't know her work, she's an interesting one to check out, most certainly. For those of you who admire Lady Gaga happens to really admire Marina Abramovich's work. So cool performance artist to check out, but that's an older Robert Wilson. His look is very iconic. Although he doesn't have that much of a heavy makeup design in Einstein on the Beach, there's a look about the lighting design and the very minimal set design and the preference for having action in slow motion is really coming to the fore in his work. So Golden Windows wasn't, I can't even find any video archival recordings of it, which, you know, that's a project for me for later. However, his work and him as an artist, really interesting to consider. So if you were piqued by what he said, I encourage you to check out more of his work. As a way of concluding our discussion, I want to talk about 1986, the next year of the Next Wave Festival. Finally, John Cage and Merce Cunningham make an appearance. They are a collaborative duo of choreographed movement and music that's very powerful in the avant-garde 20th century music scene. John Cage had his hand in a number of different things, from establishing the prepared piano, the idea of taking a piano and putting implements inside of it to create percussive sounds, to, you know, revolutionizing the use of percussion within a lot of concert music, and using chance procedure, where the composer as a voice is kind of eliminated. Additionally, was also really important in the electronic music scene, and used a lot of what we call musique concrète, pre-recording musical samples and collaging them with tape in a studio after the fact. So this was in a day and era in which, you know, sounds were recorded on tape, you know, like cassette tape is the same kind of magnetic tape. And you can actually cut those and tape them together on one side and still have them play through a playhead to create collages of sounds. A very interesting technique. You know, this presentation in 86 is really typical of a Cage piece. Let me go ahead and pull up the title of it so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Okay, so he wrote this piece called Roratorio, and it's an example of a piece of his that's a process piece. There are a number of pieces that are formed like this. It's blank, comma, blank, blank, circus on blank. So in this case, the Roratorio is indeed, the Roratorio is indeed an Irish circus on Finnegan's Wake, a radio play for electronic tapes, speaker, and Irish folk musicians. So it's using this same process as a way of creating a piece. So Finnegan's Wake is the source text of this piece of music. It uses musique concrète as the, at least the opening, in addition to incorporating other elements from Irish folk music. So there's no video of this piece, unfortunately, that I could find, although I do have audio. So I would love to share a sample of this piece with you. Hold on.
that the don't you come or walk Is it the French song? This is the grandma. This is the outfit of the shock between the toes. This is their Lego home. Jimmy's is a cool and affinity dispatch to irrigate the Wellington. The Jimmy's Fauntleroy Gold Fox. This is the this car shaking his pig-made heart. Tis a juke.
So what's happening here, and this is just a sonic representation, there's obviously a there's obviously a choreographed element that's happening, and I'll pull up an example of those collaborations with Merce Cunningham and John Cage. But the idea here is that we're using pre-recorded elements in addition to live elements. Hopefully you saw in the credits that John Cage is himself a part of the performance team, and he is narrating. So much like Laurie Anderson, Meredith Monk, Steve Reich, who we haven't seen, and Philip Glass for that matter, they're all really invested in the performance of their works as well. Let me go ahead and pull up an example of Merce Cunningham and John Cage and their work together. hopefully that gives you some sort of an idea. Merce Cunningham was the fellow that we just saw close to the camera in that last bit of the clip. So both artists very interested in chance procedure and the idea of also indeterminacy and putting indeterminate elements in both the choreography and the music. Lifelong, or not lifelong collaborators, but once they started collaborating, they had a very close relationship together as well as significant others, and it really had a very fruitful working relationship together. Merce Cunningham is very well renowned in the choreography, the history of choreography and schools of dance and thought in regards to movement. As a way of closing out our lecture today, I want to leave you with an interview of John Cage. He also famously wrote 433, which is a whole piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. So he was not only a performer, but a really creative educator and thinker, philosopher, really heavily into the philosophy and psychology of music. So let me pull up our final listening example for today.
When I hear what we call music, it seems to me that someone is talking, and talking about his feelings or about his ideas of relationships. But when I hear traffic, the sound of traffic here on 6th Avenue, for instance, I don't have the feeling that anyone is talking. I have the feeling that sound is acting. And I love the activity of sound. What it does is it gets louder and quieter, and it gets higher and lower, and it gets longer and shorter. It does all those things which I'm completely satisfied with that. I don't need sound to talk to me. We don't see much difference between time and space. We don't know where one begins and the other stops. So that most of the arts we think of as being in time, and most of the arts we think of as being in space. Marcel Duchamp, for instance, began thinking of thinking of music as being not a time art, but a space art. And he made it a piece called Sculpture Musicale, which means different sounds coming from different places and lasting, producing a sculpture which is sonorous and which remains. People expect listening to be more than listening. And so sometimes they speak of inner listening, or the meaning of sound. When I talk about music, it finally comes to people's minds that I'm talking about sound that doesn't mean anything, that is not inner, but is just outer. And they say, these people who understand that finally say, you mean it's just sounds? Thinking that for something to just be a sound is to be useless. Whereas I love sounds just as they are. And I have no need for them to be anything more than what they are. I don't want them to be psychological. I don't want a sound to pretend that it's a bucket, or that it's a president, or that it's in love with another sound. I just want it to be a sound. And I'm not so stupid either. There was a German philosopher who's very well known, Immanuel Kant, and he said there are two things that don't have to mean anything. One is music, and the other is laughter.
I love that clip of John Cage. If you're intrigued by him and the way he speaks, a number of his lectures were put down to paper in a book called Silence, which is a very interesting read and probably not what you expect it to be. In any case, that should give you a look into BAM, specifically the Next Wave Festival and the kinds of works that they present. So if you're interested to see what more recent offerings have looked like, there are so many trailers of, in the last 10 years that are online that showcase some of these new and avant-garde artists on the cutting edge of their disciplines and métiers. So I hope you have enjoyed today's lecture. I will see you next time where we continue discussing the importance of locations in New York City.